Morning, guys. It's a Sunday morning. Here we are in southern Minnesota. We're making some progress on the coffee shop. We had to restructure our business plan, and between health issues and work issues, it's taken us a while to get back toward the point where we're presenting it. We did our first presentation to our financiers last Friday, and now we're going to present it to a panel in a week and a half that will determine whether we get the funding we need to do it. We thought we could do it on our own, out of our own pocket, but the expenses just started getting a little bit too risky in terms of not being able to even finish if things went wrong. So we're trying this route, and we're hoping that we can get open this summer if things come together. So keep a good thought in your heart and mind for us in the coffee shop. Honestly, we need it. We need it financially just to get, my wife lost one of her jobs again. It's just been a tough time this year. Thankfully, we've made it through, and our troubles don't compare to most folks around this world. So I'm not trying to complain by any means. Just say a positive thought for us. Let's hope that we get this coffee shop going, and that it makes enough money for us to sustain itself. And being that it's in the building we already own, that should keep our overhead pretty low, and that means we don't need to have a ton of revenue coming in for it to be successful. So again, that's just a nice little update on the coffee shop. There's actually a town fair coming up next weekend, and we're going to go out and hand out some free drinks, trying to get some likes on on the Facebook page for the Jazz Shepherd Coffee Shop. So hopefully there's some action and some positivity going in that direction coming up these next few weeks, and I'll keep you posted. First of all, I want to talk about something I wasn't sure I was going to talk about, but it's been sticking in my craw just enough that I'm going to bring it up. This other fella has a jazz channel, and he said some rather disparaging remarks about me, about how I speak about race and what the music's about. I feel like he took me out of context numerous times, but apparently some people don't understand the difference between composition and the blues. A riff, composition and riffs aren't the same thing. A riff, rhythm and blues, the blues itself, it's about a pattern that repeats, not about forward-moving composition, not about new chords and chord changes and key changes, and a melody that's always going to deviate moving forward, but do with new notes. That's not the principles of R&B. The principles of R&B and composition within R&B is the layering of patterns to create a groove that's often very sensual, sexual in nature. It's got this pulse, this swing. The swing is the sexuality. It's a black phenomenon. It comes from the Caribbean and the African traditions, the percussion, the drums, all those counter sounds and movements. It's all part of that black experience. And to say that black music doesn't align itself with the European traditions of composition isn't some kind of a racist thing. It's just the history of the music itself. James Brown wasn't about composition in a European sense. James Brown was about, let's build a strong loop, a strong groove. Get the drummer and the bass player to play that pattern, have little pieces of other instruments creating intricate, repeatable, interlocking pieces. It's the fundamental roots of rhythm and blues. All that early R&B, it became early rock and roll. A lot of the pop music of today is rooted in that same foundation. It's a different type of composition, if you will. It's about layering, adding pieces to that layer as you go forward. It's about dynamics within those grooves, building the bars as you build towards a chorus. It's about space. It's about emptying negative space. A lot of what fills in the space in a great James Brown song is volume. When you turn it up, suddenly those parts thicken and fill in the space, is allowing the person to move to it and feel it and just fall into a groove, and that's what makes it so danceable. It's repetitious nature. And so when you start talking about the compositional aspects of jazz as it was moving forward into the 40s and 50s, it's not rocket science. It's just not. And it's common knowledge that guys like Mulligan, Joffrey, Conitz, those guys were the birth of the cool, all those players, they were grafting European sounds into the black American traditions. Ellington, of course, was a precursor to a lot of that. And Ellington always claimed to not be jazz music for that very reason. He was always compositionally driven. But even so, he always existed within patterns and loops. He just had brilliant counter loops that would overlap and convey emotional context in a brilliant way. But black music has always had a certain amount of groove, danceability, movement. And to deny the racial component of this music, to deny the pain and the sorrow, it's to not understand anything that art's about. The winners of the great wars get to write the history books. The losers of those conflicts get to make great art. The Lord is My Shepherd can't be written in a bubble bath. You can't be in chains and in bondage and have art that doesn't express some form of freedom, an opposition to tyranny, an opposition to oppression. It's the human condition. You tell me I'm not free, watch me find freedom somehow within these chains. And that's the power of the music. That's where all the magic lies. And this guy was just saying some... I didn't watch all of it. I don't have the time or the interest to hear some guy stutter and mutter his way through condescension of me and what I believe and how I feel. And it just shocks me that someone could be so upset with what I say. And it's always a white guy. Always. It's never some black guy saying, dude, I feel like you've crossed the line. They always thank me for what I have to say and how I represent them and how, in some ways, I even enlighten them in how they feel about their own culture and history. It's biblical in its power. It's a voice against tyranny and oppression, their art. But it's always some white American who's either conservative and, or it's the other side, the woke side, who thinks they're so intellectual that they can be so condescending when the last thing this music needs is that kind of divide. And I ponder writing big, long responses and getting to some debate, and that's just not what I want to do. The music isn't about arguing and debating and creating more division. There's already so much division in this world. I just feel sorry for this guy, and he was doing the top 10 Blue Notes of all time, and it was the most cliche choices you could make. And I feel like I've earned my place on the pulpit to speak about what I speak about. I spent years DJing in that community. I have so many friends that have validated my thoughts. My friend Jean-Michel, who literally grew up in the jazz community with all the jazz greats, has echoed my sentiments, have been spoken by all the people he knew, from Ray Brown to Sweets Edison to, it's a long list. He knew Count Basie really well, Oscar Peterson. He knew all the giants, especially the ones that were in Europe on a consistent basis. So there's been a ton of validity to what I say through people who knew the musicians and the artists, who lived through those times. And so to have some white guy half my age with the most cliche list of all time, I mean, can you really even make the 10 greatest Blue Note records of all time unless you have all the Blue Notes? I mean, his list was straight from the handbook. And there were some fine records in there, no question about it. And again, I just skimmed through it enough to see what records he was showing. I was trying to figure out where he talked about me because a few people commented to me about it. And so I just want to get a little insight into what he had to say. And it was offensive, and I wouldn't say it hurt. I just was shocked that someone could be so indignant to the point where he was recommending people don't watch my channel. I wouldn't recommend you do it. It's like, I have not just the community behind me and the effort and the time and the passion. I also have the record collection to validate a lot of what I'm seeing. A lot of the racism doesn't just exist in my mind and in the theory. It exists in the numbers and the mathematics and the science and the business of this industry and of this country. But all these labels I've collected, from the West Coast white labels to the small independent black labels to the major labels, they all inform and speak about the difference in the American experience. And as an art form that's expressing emotion through improvisation, there's just no way you can separate that experience, that environment, and that personality from what these cats are saying. And so I just want to say shame on you, dude. I mean, you're entitled to think and feel how you want, absolutely. Go on with what you want to do. But I don't feel like you should be so condescending about what I'm trying to do. I feel like this music is important, has cultural significance beyond Cecil Taylor and his unit structures. And you're so sophisticated because you get it, dude. I'm really proud of you. Really happy for you. It's such great music. He's just... I'm moving on. But there's so much history that this music does inform and enlighten. And there's reasons why jazz fell out of favor. And one of the predominant reasons was the arrival of rhythm and blues and rock and roll. And rock and roll, if you go back to the late 40s, early 50s, was kind of synonymous with rhythm and blues. There's not a lot of separation there. Rock and roll might have had a little bit more Chuck Berry, a little more guitar, soloing, but rhythm and blues and rock and roll were very interchangeable in those early days. And Elvis was doing both. Like, it's not really... And early rhythm and blues, there's not a lot of white artists that are a part of that. It's a bit like soul jazz. There's not a lot of white artists that are part of that. A lot of times the simplicity of the pattern and the riff and the groove is what allows me to emote so effortlessly. I'm not sitting there thinking about where the changes are in the chords and the abstract thirds and diminished sevenths, and I gotta, we're free, so we have to count 32 bars so we can meet again on that one. There's no having to think about it. It's just, I have a riff, I'm going to play that riff, and then I'm going to improvise on that riff and allow my emotions to speak for me. It's a simple thing. And rhythm and blues comes along, and because of its simplicity in the rhythm sense, it really kind of knocks jazz out of the dance clubs, which jazz was already having a tough time competing because in the post-war economy, the big bands were tough to keep on the road financially. So it was leading to the jump blues and the developments of the boogie woogie players, and that jump blues, guys like Louis Jordan and the great Tiny Bradshaw. These guys were doing things that were simplified, smaller groups. There were still horns in the jump blues, but the horns were performing in more of a rhythm and blues context. Smaller accent horn playing to spice and to punctuate. The long solos and that's faded away. So rhythm and blues ascends, and black music goes with it. You know what I mean? They're one and the same, and jazz and black music are an interwoven fabric. It's not like it's this line was drawn and there was a whole new thing. They graft into each other. But certain things have made jazz unpopular in this country. And number one, it was just a long time ago. And there's a certain age where things get so distant past that they lose their contemporary exposure. And it's about a decade's worth of time. When you're in the 80s, talking about the 60s and glorifying the 60s has a value commercially because people who grew up in that decade are now adults and they want to be reminded of their childhood and their toys and their songs and their movies and films. So you get that regurgitation of what happened 15, 20 years ago. And that always perpetuates itself in fashion, in music, in film, and television. It just, you see it everywhere in life, that what happened 15, 20 years ago has become kind of retro and hip again. And it always kind of moves forward. And once we moved past the 90s, the 60s became obsolete, the 70s became what was in fashion. And so when you're talking about music from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, there's just not a lot of people left alive that can contextualize the times and the places to keep it kind of feeling current in the mouths and the minds of the youngsters. Old school now is Pac and Biggie and into the early 2000s, if you're honest. Like, Most Def has become old school. Outkast has become old school. And that always moves forward. So time is one of the issues that we're facing. I think the same thing is facing the blues. I think the same thing is facing the early soul and the great funk era of the 70s. Like, if you're not 50 plus years old, you don't really remember the funk. And the funk that was showing up in films, in Tarantino's movies and stuff in the 90s, that was, again, that cycling of what happened when he was a kid, or what his dad was listening to, or what he heard when he was at the pool with his friends in the car, stereo radios. Again, we've moved past that era. And so it's hard to keep those time frames relevant. And so jazz has become buried in wave after wave of new sounds. And there's been not a lot of people to preserve the historical context of this music and how it's interwoven with all the rest of the black music that this country's created. Secondly, there's the issue of jazz fans themselves. And this by no means is all jazz fans, but the most pretentious, self-enlightened, arrogant, judgmental fan base in music is the jazz collector. And a guy like I'm talking about from that other channel, they think that because they're repeating the status quo, that they're so knowledgeable, intellectual. As I watched him fumble through his thoughts and his words and not have any context to back up anything of what he was saying. And I've watched a few other channels recently, and there's a lot of, oh, this is great, this is amazing. It's why? Why is it amazing? Was it something that the guy played? Was it something that it made you feel? Contextualize what you're expressing. To simply say something's amazing or incredible, it's not enough. It doesn't really illuminate anything. It stays and remains purely just an opinion. An opinion without fact, an opinion without information to contextualize it remains just an opinion. But it's not even that's the issue. It's the condescension that so many quote-unquote jazz fans have towards not just new jazz fans and beginner jazz fans, but towards the music itself. We glorify John Coltrane, we glorify Miles Davis, we glorify Ornette Coleman, we glorify a lot of what came at the very tail end of the music when its popularity was waning and its audience had left it. For a reason. And yet the modern collector thinks that because that stuff was so difficult and had grafted so much composition and difficult sounds into it, that it's so sophisticated and intellectual. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I think we misrepresent jazz with, is its intellectual side. The music wasn't about intellect. It was about feeling. It was about emotion. It was about what's in my heart and on my gut and in my mind. It's like, I need to get that off my chest. Intellectualism is a distraction from emotion. And we're governed by thought or by feeling, and art needs to be governed by feeling more often than thought. And so much of that difficult music, like that Cecil Taylor record that he had issue with, and he was talking about how important it was, how it's great, and everyone should like it. No! There's no way everyone's going to like that. It's a noisy, complex, self-destructive piece of music that came from a place of cacophony. And it's fine in its right place at its right time once in a while, but you need to be honest with people. If I'm making the most spicy meal in the world, it might be fantastic to me. I might love it. But 99 people out of 100 in this room are going to be like, woo, that's too much for me. And that's okay. But for me to say this is going to be great, everyone needs to love it, you have to love it, this is so important, you lose credibility. You lose validity. You have no credibility with your audience anymore when you're forcing something down their throat that's so inaccessible that it stayed on the fringes of the very music that it was a part of its entire life. And it's more popular now because of these people than it ever was in its own time frame. It's just frustrating to me because part of what I'm trying to do is make people love jazz. I'm not saying don't buy Cecil Taylor unit structures. I'm saying you probably won't like it. Try something you will like first. I'm going to recommend to you jazz I think most people will enjoy and find that, wow, this is much different than what I thought jazz was. There's a preconceived notion in most people's minds of what jazz is. And it's so incorrect. And it partly comes from these snobs and these elites who think that they're so intellectual and they're showing how sophisticated they are by putting on their monocle and professing how great this record was. And I get it. And if you don't get it, you just need to listen to it until you get it. It's offensive. You're a jerk off. Simple as that. You know what I mean? And it's about playing the music that the lifetime of jazz was. 99% of this music was incredibly joyful, fun, danceable, listenable, embodied multiple emotional states. From somber to joyful, from sexual to angry to intense to melancholic. All these different emotional contexts exist within the body and framework of jazz. A guy like Ellington could sometimes capture all that stuff on one record. To have the masses think that jazz is nothing but this intricate, off-the-wall, dissonant, cacophonic expression of intellectualism, most people don't want that. There's enough of that in life as it is not to sit back and try to think through the music you're listening to when it's not anything enjoyable to the average person unless you choose to go to something that difficult. If you decide I like really, really spicy food and you want to go to that spicy food and say, this is great, I love it, more power to you. But trying to impress upon everyone else that you have to eat this is great, it's so important, makes you a jerk off. Can't stand it. The point of my channel, the point of this music is to help people enjoy it. And the difficult stuff, the avant-garde stuff, the free stuff, people at the time didn't really enjoy it. Half the musicians did not enjoy it. Most of the labels did not enjoy it. Most of the audiences weren't there to buy it. And yet somehow it's become elevated to this place where this is what jazz is. This last little dying gasp of a man's life is what we're choosing to remember his entire existence. I hope I'm not remembered by my dying utterances. What a sad statement that would be, is if all you remember me was by the last few things I had to say on my deathbed. I got a body of work that stands for itself. A lifetime of achievement and accomplishment and conversation and dialogue. Perspective, thought. Trying to make something that was important in American history and a part of this racial component of this country. I'm trying to elevate it back to the place where it belongs as high art. That anyone and everyone can love if it weren't for the assholes out there trying to make you think that, no, you can't like Sal Salvador. You shouldn't listen to Stan Getz. I mean, you're not really getting it unless you put Eric Dolphy out to lunch. And I like Out to Lunch. I'll play it once a year to enjoy its dissonance and the intensity of what was happening. But once again, if you don't have the civil rights movement as part of your framework to recognize what you're hearing, to dismiss race as not being a part of this, to dismiss American history as not being the fabric that illuminates this art form, I just don't think you're even paying any attention. You've just read too many of the same critics' voices, the same record reviews, the same YouTube channels, and everyone's loving the same 10 fucking records. And there's so much more to jazz. There's decades of jazz. And yet the amount of people who don't think that they can like jazz pre-1956 or 7, it's insane to me. There's so much great stuff that came out in the 10-inch era alone. 1950 to 55, there's all this incredible music in there that most consumers of jazz, they don't even recognize. And I just wish people could understand that my message here is this music is important and it's easy to love. And you can put the music on that will fit a sunny day or a rainy afternoon or a misty night or a romantic dinner. Jazz has every color you can imagine. Every scene in any film, you could use jazz to back it up, including the dissonance of Cecil Taylor or the cacophonic excitement of a John Coltrane Om or Cool as a Mom or something like that. Those songs can have a place, but they're meant to highlight chaos and intense fear and aggravation and a dark side of the human psyche. It's delving into that stuff. And to act like that's the only emotional state for us to be in listening to jazz is doing jazz a great disservice. Because most jazz is joyful. Most jazz was filled with love, hope, optimism, seeing a future that we could make work. It wasn't about this divide and this chaos and this hate and this animosity. The modern perception of jazz, as brought to you by most jazz channels and most so-called quote-unquote experts, they're so wrong. And how this guy was so offended by what I had to say, it still is a little bit puzzling to me. Because again, my overall message is jazz is lovable. It's filled with so much music that can illuminate your daily experience and match every mood and every color and every time of day and season of the year. Jazz has that. April in Paris, Autumn Leaves. I mean, you can do anything with that music. And so again, it's not like I'm reinventing the wheel here or saying things that are just my own opinion. Black music is what black music is. It comes from tropical drum conversations. It's filled with rhythm, pattern, loop. Hip-hop is the descendant of that same thing. So to not understand that riffing and looping and improvising on a riff is a different form of writing songs than the composition of complex arrangement and complex chord changes and key changes, and that's the European thing. And yes, they grafted and borrowed from each other all the time. I mean, Ellington is the ultimate example. Yeah, Ellington always made it swing. Always made it swing. There was always a sensual, sexual nature to Ellington's music and a spiritual nature to it as well. And I think there's such a disservice being done to jazz today. And we're never going to grow it in America. We're never going to make people appreciate it in America. And that's the other part of the problem here. Is speaking of America, there is a focal effort on the part of the elites who write our textbooks and control our media to maintain a racial divide. It suits their interest to prevent us from having unity. Black and white and brown being unified, sharing similar interests, which in fact we do. We all want cleaner cities, better schools, better water, health options, healthcare. Every one of us wants that. It takes a great deal of concerted effort on the part of the elite to keep us so divided and fighting over the stupid little minutia that the woke and the rednecks don't realize they're being played. I mean, you're so focused on the little things you're so upset about that you don't really see the real oppression that's wringing your neck. You're sitting there going, oh, there's a little thumbnail, it's bothering me, I gotta get this hangnail out, while someone's choking you. The economic squeeze that's being placed upon all of us by those who have confiscated the world's wealth, that's the problem. Until we address that, we can look at all the other issues that are dividing us and not recognize that any of that's all smoke. We got to stop looking at all these little things of outrage. Because outrage makes people think that they're being indignant and that they're making a change and they're taking a stand. But you're taking a stand over something that has so little significance or importance compared to the real issues of why we are where we are. And it's economic distribution, and it's the wealth of equality, and looking at the planet in a different sense that's not governed by race and nation and religion. Those constructs are artificial, meant to keep us divided. And so as long as that is being maintained in America, we will never allow jazz to ascend its rightful place as one of the great American art forms. To validate jazz and blues as important American institutions brought to us by sophisticated, incredible human beings would do a disservice to the underlying current of division. To teach kids music in school and the importance of what this music was and how it helped people through a difficult time. We're trying to whitewash slavery right now, not speak about the honest truth of that experience. I mean, our history books are being corrupted, destroyed, so they can rewrite the narrative and make it look like that wasn't so bad. And I'm forced to listen to country music at my job sometimes. There's an underlying narrative in country music that, and I see it in my mother-in-law. She reflects this, that, well, we're just good white people, and Jesus loves us, and I got my pickup truck, so gosh darn it, we're not really that bad. We do what we think we do the right thing. And it just has this kind of egotistical overlooking our flaws and our faults because we're white and God loves us. I just hear things in those songs, and I probably have earbuds in most of the times. I can't stomach it. It's disgusting to me to have to sit there and living in that music and that mind frame of people that I can't relate to. My empathy, my understanding, my human experience is a global condition. It's not relegated to the regional dimensions of drinking a can of beer, having a pickup truck, slapping my dog across the head, and cheating on my wife. And underlying that is that we're American, we got our flag, and we're good people. Gosh, it makes me sick. I just can't sit there living in that place. Most of the music I listen to has a very broad human condition to it. And that's where Black American music comes in for me. That's where a lot of the great UK music from many different decades, reggae music, it has a music that's a message of the people. And it speaks up for those of those of voice. That's the music that I can relate to. I can feel it in my soul, and it's medicating. It's a rare Rage Against the Machine touches on that for me. But I talked about a few episodes ago. There's not a lot of American artists that are white that I can sit back and go, man, I love their body of work. I might like it or enjoy it or value the guitar playing or value some of the developments they made artistically. But the Bob Dylans and the Bob Marleys are rare in pop music. People that have something to say that has substance. And jazz, if you're going to value it and give it a place of value in American history, it would rewrite a lot of the history of the narrative that's being pumped into all of us on a daily basis. They want people to listen to that country music saying, well, we're Americans and we're right because we're white and God loves us. That means everything we've done is the right thing. And that's fine with their narrative because it maintains the divide. It maintains the arrogance and the ignorance. And most of these same people never walk a day in the city, never spend a moment in a museum, never spend a moment walking down an inner city street, interacting with the global community that lives in those same cities. Most rural Americans won't go into Chicago or New York or even Minneapolis. And even where we live here, Rochester's 110,000 people, got a lot of East African immigrants, got some Caribbean immigrants. People out here in the country are scared to go into Rochester. They're going to get shot. It's insane. Rochester is one of the safest cities in America. And of course, safest cities in America is not always saying a lot compared to the rest of the world, because the violence in American cities is so much higher incrementally than any of the rest of the developed world for sure. And a lot of the violence levels in American cities is on par with places that are war-torn. And I say that with a chuckle, but it's sad that there's cities in America that have as much violence and atrocities and shootings as cities in war-torn countries. That's not a healthy indicator of a healthy nation. It's just not. And all the shootings that are going on in this country on a daily basis, I mean, you have to take a stand at some point. At some point, the only modicum of moderation can't just be the underlying principle that you can't regulate us in any way because it's going to affect our profits. And anybody who wants to pretend it's anything other than that is naive. Because standing up against your government, you ain't going to do that with your guns. They got bombs, they got planes, they got tanks, they got armies of millions. You ain't standing up against that type of power with your rifle. Even your AR-15 ain't going to do you no good if they decide to really want to. And that's not going to happen. That's not what the system is built to do. The system is built to keep us ignorant, divided, going to work and paying our taxes. And it's a bleak position that we play. That's why there's a lot of recognition of depression. That's why there's a lot of recognition of unhappiness and suicide. And that's why so much of this country is medicated to the point that they're just productive enough to keep a job, keep paying taxes, that they can skim those dollars off, keep going to Walmart, buying those goods. But we're unfulfilled. Because being worker ants on an anthill was never our destiny. And when we're forced to live in that destiny, and we're forced to live on that anthill, depression is the only end result that can be achieved. There's no happiness in that pursuit. We're meant to light a fire, look up at the stars, and question, go, I wonder. If you're not questioning your purpose and your being and the why are you here, if you're not questioning and growing and building your own personal philosophy in this world, without that philosophy, it's a depressing walk. It's an unrewarding, unfulfilling life. And many people use addiction to fill that void. Many people use religion to fill that void. Many people use the evangelism of outrage that's created in the media to give them these pulpits to stand on, that they're so thinking that this is going to make them. And the thing is, if they get rid of abortion, you're not going to be any happier than you are now. You've just chosen this crusade to die with. But it's not really your crusade to fight. And abortion is a simple issue. It's simple. Let a woman, her family, and her doctor decide. Let's keep it out of politics. Let's keep it out of the most powerful nation's elections. The most powerful nation in the world, economically and militarily, often has its economic and political decisions being made off things like abortion. That's a smokescreen. You're not being told the real issues. You're being told distracting issues to maintain divides. And racism in this country is a factor in that same principle. There's no real underlying hatred of minorities by the elite. They don't really have a need to have that type of hate towards any group of people. So they're not constructing it. They're just enhancing a state of mind that exists due in part to the ignorance of the arrogant. And you haven't learned enough and broadened your own horizons to have empathy for anyone besides your own group. And so when you're informed to be afraid of other groups, it just has such a sticking power because you don't know any different or any better. It's the difference between knowing someone and having someone tell you something about them. And you're like, no, I know Simon. Simon's not that. I know him. Versus me telling you something about someone you don't know nothing about. I say, oh, so-and-so is this. And you don't know them. You're like, okay, whatever. If you don't know Afghanistanis, if you don't know Saudis and Indians and Pakistanis and you name it, Iraqis, Ethiopians, Somalis, it doesn't matter. If you don't know any of these people, their groups, their nations, their histories, their immigrations, if you don't know the stories of any of these groups and you're just afraid of them all because of your ignorance, there's no way you can have empathy for them, and it allows us to be so misinformed and miseducated and divided. So I wasn't really planning on going down this road like I have. But again, it's just, I don't understand how someone can be so offended by what I say. And love is what's coming from underneath me at all times. Not just love for this music, not just love for the black community, but love for this human condition, this human experience, and the power that humans have to overcome tyranny and oppression. That gives me the bumps. That gives me the excitement of, wow, this is important. Art can change how we feel about our struggle. That's valuable. Art can be this thing that we can cling to when the times are tough and we can't see the shore. So we can write a song about, man, someday when I get that island, I'm going to plant me some potatoes and some pineapples. I'm going to find me a shoreline. I'm going to sing that song. I'm going to believe it and feel it. And hopefully someday I'm going to get to some shore, some land. But it's only because I'm drifting in water that I'm dreaming about the land. I can only dream about freedom if I don't have it. A man who lives in freedom can't quantify even what it means. And so we get distracted by kneeling down and anthems and flags, thinking that these things define freedom, which they do in no way whatsoever. In fact, if you're conditioned to do them, that's a form of oppression in and of itself. If you can't be enough of a free thinker to be able to criticize your nation or the decisions and policies of that nation without feeling like you're being unpatriotic, you're brainwashed. And the very definition of democracy, as brought to us by the Greeks, was to question everything, always. And that's the philosophy that's underlied most of my belief systems through my life. And that's what's gotten me to the place where I am, understanding jazz how I do. It's not about some racial mandate. It's about the history of the world here in our own context, brought to life. And it's about the biblical nature of jazz music and the blues to help these people overcome that struggle and the power and the magic of that. That should make you excited, not angry. What are you angry about? What are you so offended by? I mean, I'm a little lost. So, jazz is important, not because we say so, because it just is. It helped these people get through the wilderness. And as the Bible and the Old Testament and the story of those people migrating through oppression and occupation and slavery and tyranny, as that's as important today, 2,000, 3,000 years later, this music will ring through time and will be the legacy, a harbinger of what we created in this epoch. We will be remembered for that, because that music will never die. Because any music that speaks for the oppressed will always have an audience. The music written by the Romans, we don't remember. The writings of the Babylonians, we have little memory of. Remember Hammurabi's code, his rule book, but we don't really remember the writings. And of course, there's exceptions. You know, the Epic of Gilgamesh, that type of stuff. But for the most part, it's the writings of the oppressed that tell us something about ourselves. And you want to have some self-reflection, look at those who you oppress and have no empathy for. That'll tell you something about yourself. I have the world tattooed on my arm because that's the club I'm a member of. That's my group. Human Earthling. There's nothing else on my can. Religion, I flushed that a long time ago. Nationalism, unless it's Olympic hockey, I don't give a shit about it. Race, it discourages me that we still see it. It's so not clearly demarcated. There's so many infinite shades of it. How can we even try to group people with it? It's ridiculous. Economics are the real division. And the removal of the control of the wealth by the few is the real issue that we should all be crusading for. But instead we're outraged by the woke community and the redneck pushback and all this dissertation in the news and the media, creating a cacophony of noise so that we don't ever see what I should be fighting for, what I should be standing for. I mean, it's a powerful message if you really want to focus and think about it. And so my message has never been one of exclusion. My message has never been one of anything but love this American history, because there's power in it. It has the power to heal all of us. That's the gift. When I'm having a tough day, there's a reference point in jazz that can minister to my ills. I feel blue today. Oh man, what did these guys go through? And they somehow overcame it. They somehow made great music in spite of it. They somehow danced, had a barbecue and a hoedown, and wow, if they can do that in spite of what they go through on a daily basis, that ministers and edifies me to kind of stand up, walk upright, keep my chin up, and say, you know what I'm facing? It might be an obstacle, but I'm going to fight through it. Till my dying breath, I need to be optimistic and live this life, because life is the gift. And I want to understand it as best as I can. I certainly don't want to take my lessons of life from some kid half my age criticizing my experience of philosophy on life. I mean, the guy had a hard time stumbling through a sentence without pausing and stuttering and muttering his way through it. And good luck to you, dude. And I hope you grow enough to stop telling people to not watch my channel. I don't think it's any way to grow your channel is to criticize other channels. That seems really counterintuitive, and I think karma will reflect very poorly on that choice. So best of luck to you, man. I wish you all the best. I hope you understand that where I'm coming from isn't one of trying to discredit a small percentage of the jazz music versus trying to illuminate the larger body of work that needs to be recognized, but is forgotten by all the critics, all the writers, all the channels, as we push and try to impress upon people the importance of these few small dying gasps of the music. It's not true. It's just not. That avant-garde thing was just a small thing that was not the focal point of an entire, you're doing the music a disservice. And when you only preach about unit structures, you're saying 99% of the people in this country will never get it, nor can they, nor should they try. And that to me is bullshit. Because I can show every one of them 100 jazz songs that they will love. And as a guy who's played jazz as a DJ, so many times when I played something that was accessible and fun and easy to listen to, some Jimmy Rainey on guitar, some Kenny Burrell, some Claude Williamson, people would come to me and say they love this. What is this? And they would even say to me, this isn't jazz. What is it? Because their preconceived notion of what jazz is so incorrect by how it's portrayed in the media, how it's portrayed in films, how it's been made to think that it's some avant-garde piece of art that only Sidney Pollack could recognize. That is not the body of the jazz work. That was a crazy hairstyle we tried in our later days. That's it. Hairstyle. The rest of this body of music needs to be illuminated, have a light put upon it, and the importance and significance of it needs to be spoken of. And I'm one of the only channels that's doing that. What happens now in the jazz scene is nice, but it's not as important as what happened during the Civil Rights era, coming through Jim Crow. It's just not. This is what needs to be spoken about because of the power of it, because of the meaning behind it, and what it can do for us. And like I said, Bob Marley has that same feeling for me where it heals me. In the abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. Every man thinks his burden is the heaviest. It's that little kind of insight into life through Marley's lyrics that just kind of makes my hair sound like, ooh, I feel better now. And I can rejoice and feel good about life. And jazz is layered with that, vocally and instrumentally. I can just feel it throughout the music. And that's not to say that the resistance wasn't important and powerful in the 50s and 60s, because it was. And I edify and speak about that blue note resistance all the time. But until you're done making cliche lists of the most important blue notes based off every other list that's out there, I don't think you should be criticizing me. Just my opinion. And if you need to, you need to. Go ahead. Go on with your bad self. You ain't stopping what I'm going to say or do. You ain't going to change how I feel about it. Y'all be blessed. Y'all be loved. There's a couple new t-shirts in the merchandise store in the credits below, so check that out. If you want to support the channel through Patreon, it's always appreciated. We'll get back to the music on the next episode. Got lots of fun stuff coming up to talk to you about, including a great episode on Norman Granz coming up that I'm starting to put together. I've a guest that's going to do some illuminating for us on that episode as well. So I appreciate you all. Thank you all for being supportive and appreciating what I have to offer. And again, it's not really about me. It's about the music. I don't ever sit here talking about how great I am. It's not about that. It's about the music. It's how great the music is. And so for someone to kind of criticize me, it just feels so out of place. It just feels so misdirected. And it makes me really question and wonder to myself, what are you so upset about, buddy? Talk to you soon. Peace.